The night over Asgard was cold, clear, and heavy with danger, while silver light spilled over tall towers and wide stone roads. Below the city, deep inside the mountain, old machines slept under layers of dust and iron. And the people above had almost forgotten their names. But the balance of the 9 realms was never truly quiet, because one stolen object could wake powers that should have stayed buried forever. That object was a crimson relic. A hard, glowing stone set in a gold frame, and it had been taken from the vaults of Valhalla by Loki, who wanted more than power for himself. He wanted a crown that could command Ragnarok, the final storm that could break every realm apart and leave him standing over the pieces. Thor knew the relic was missing before the alarms even rang, because the air changed around him. And the thunder in his blood answered first. He was the god of thunder, a man of strong honor, broad shoulders, and bright blonde hair that caught the light like fire. He wanted to stop Loki, protect the realms, and keep the old promises that held order together. Beside him stood Sarah, a renegade Valkyrie with black hair tied back in a long braid, sharp eyes, and armor that looked polished but had been repaired too many times. She had once served the old war halls, but she had broken from them after she saw how often the powerful used duty to hide cruelty. Sarah wanted freedom, truth, and a chance to choose who was worth saving. She mattered because she knew the secret paths between worlds, and because she was the only one brave enough to say that blind obedience had nearly destroyed the realms before. When Thor found her on a high bridge under the storm clouds, she was already waiting with her winged helm under one arm. She looked toward the mountain and said Loki had gone into the lower vault tunnels before dawn, where the storm engines slept beneath Asgard. That machine had been built long ago to pull lightning through the roots of the world and power the gates between realms. But it had been sealed because it could tear reality if touched the wrong way. Loki had not stolen the Crimson Relic to rule a single kingdom. He had stolen it to wake the engine, feed it with ancient storm fire, and forge a crown that would let him guide Ragnarok instead of fear it. If he succeeded, the gates of Valhalla would close, the souls of warriors would be trapped, and every realm would be thrown into chaos. Thor and Sarah did not waste time on old arguments. They ran into the mountain, through halls of black stone and carved runes that glowed in warning. The first doors were already bent open, and frost spread across the floor in sharp white veins. Loki had passed there not long before, and his trickery left false trails and broken seals behind him. Deep below, they found the storm engine itself, a vast ring of iron and crystal wrapped round a core of blue lightning. It was beginning to turn again, slow at first, then louder, as if the mountain had started to breathe. The crimson relic floated above the core, held in place by chains of light, and every pulse from it made the walls shake. Loki stood across the chamber in dark green armor, calm and smiling, with black hair falling over one eye and his hands spread like a man greeting an audience. He looked pleased, not because he was surprised, but because he had expected them. Loki's motive was simple, and that made him more dangerous. He believed the realms were ruled by fear, and he was tired of being pushed aside as the clever brother who was never trusted. He wanted a crown that would force all the realms to obey one will, his own, so that no one could reject him again. He had convinced himself that if he controlled Ragnarok, then he would control fate itself. Thor stepped forward, and his voice rolled through the chamber like distant thunder as he demanded that Loki shut the engine down. Loki only smiled and pressed the relic into the forge ring. The machine answered at once, and a wave of power burst outward, throwing both heroes back and cracking the floor. The first consequence was immediate. Across the 9 realms, the sky tore open in flickers of ice, fire, and pale moonlight, as if each world had been pulled into the same wound. Sarah grabbed Thor by the arm and pulled him toward a side passage just as the chamber filled with blue lightning. They did not stay to fight there, because Loki had already started the process, and if the crown was finished, no army could stop what came next. So they raced through the realm gates, moving from one broken world to the next, trying to cut Loki off before the forge could seal itself. In the frozen realm of Nor, the ground split with cold mist, and jagged ice towers rose around them like spears. There, phantom warriors stepped from the fog. Pale armored shapes with hollow faces and swords made of light, born from broken oaths and forgotten vows. These were not living soldiers. They were the leftover promise of warriors who had once sworn to guard the gates of Valhalla, then failed their duty and were cursed to wander until their oath was either honored or broken forever. Because Loki had disturbed the old power, the phantoms had awakened. And now they attacked anyone who carried the scent of the realm gates. Sarah knew their rules better than Thor did. She saw that the phantoms did not strike where fear was loud, but where a promise had been dishonored. So she shouted to Thor that brute force would only feed them. He had to meet them with truth. Thor lowered his hammer, spoke the names of the fallen guards, and swore that he would finish what they had begun. The phantoms hesitated, their icy blades trembling, and Sarah used that opening to break their line and drive them back into the fog. Even so, they could not win every battle, because every realm they crossed was becoming more unstable. In the realm of Imberfall, rivers of fire ran beneath shattered black bridges, and the heat bent the air like glass. There, the crown's power had already reached the sky, and Loki's shadow moved through every flame. Thor and Sarah found old gatekeepers hiding inside a ruin, frightened and tired, their faces lit red by firelight. One of them, a woman named Mara with gray hair and soot on her cheeks, explained that Valhalla's outer gates were beginning to close on their own. The old law said that when the storm engine was fully awakened, the gates would seal to protect the dead from being pulled into the living war. But if the gates sealed too soon, no one could cross to stop the crown, and every realm would be cut off from help. That was the real threat now. They were not simply racing Loki. They were racing a machine built to choose fear over mercy. Thor listened, and for the first time in a long while, he understood that strength alone could not carry this fight. Sarah saw it too. She had left the Valkyries because they had followed rules even when those rules hurt the helpless. Now she saw a new kind of courage in Thor, one that could bend without breaking. Together they pushed onward, through moonlit ruins and wind-split bridges, until they reached the outer road to Valhalla. But Loki had planned for them. He appeared above the road on a fractured platform of storm glass, now wearing half the crown. It was not complete yet, but the crimson relic was already locked inside, and lightning crawled around its metal points like living snakes. Loki told them the truth with a bitter smile. He had not only stolen the relic, he had also known that the storm engine would awaken the phantoms, because he had studied the old oaths and learned how broken promises could be turned into weapons. He had fed the anger of the old dead to weaken the realm gates and make everyone believe the collapse was inevitable. That revelation hit Thor hard, because it showed that Loki's greatest weapon was not lightning or magic. It was patience and a cold mind that could turn history into a trap. Then the final path opened, and the rainbow bridge rose before them, bright and damaged, stretching across a sky full of storm Chinese letter. Wait, it was not a clean bridge anymore. It was cracked in places, glowing in others, and wrapped in clouds that spun like a living wall. On its far end stood the great gates of Valhalla, tall and golden, already starting to close. If they shut all the way, the crown would lock the realms into one violent pattern, and Ragnarok would begin under Loki's command. Thor and Sarah ran onto the bridge while phantom warriors rose behind them and storm energy thundered overhead. The whole place shook with every step. Loki followed, now wearing the nearly finished crown, and he called the phantoms to his side. He believed they would obey the one who held the old anger of the realms. But Sarah had learned the one thing Loki never understood. The phantoms were not loyal to power. They were loyal to promises, so she stepped forward, removed her helm, and told them she would honor the oath they had been denied. She promised to keep the gates open long enough for the realms to heal, and she swore it with her full name and her true rank, not as a Valkyrie of the old order, but as someone who chose her own path. The phantoms turned, and for the first time, their hollow faces looked almost human. Loki shouted in rage and hurled a storm blast that shattered part of the bridge. Thor caught the falling beam with both hands, his blonde hair whipping in the wind, and he drove lightning into the broken span to hold it together. Sarah fought Loki at close range, moving fast and clean, her black braid flying behind her as she struck at the crown's weak seams. Loki tried to overwhelm her with illusions, showing her every failure she had ever carried, every order she had broken, every life she had not saved. But Sarah no longer ran from her past, she used it. She knew the cost of obedience, and she knew the cost of fear. So she kept moving until she reached the relic's frame. Then Thor made his choice. He did not try to outmuscle the crown. He used the storm engine's own rhythm, calling the lightning into the bridge, into the gates, and into Loki's weapon at once. The power surged through him like a living river, and for one breathless moment, Everyone saw the truth of the old machine. It was not built only to destroy, it was built to test whether those who held power could choose restraint. Thor chose restraint. He guided the storm away from the gates just as Sarah struck the crown free. And the crimson relic flew out in a burst of red light. Loki stumbled back, shocked, and the crown cracked down the middle before it could fully bind to him. The phantoms let out one final roar, then faded into pale sparks that rose into the sky like lost vows finally released. The gates of Valhalla stayed open, but only just, and the bridge held. Though it groaned under the strain, Loki was forced to retreat into the storm shadows, his face full of rage and disbelief, but his defeat was not simple, because he escaped with a small fragment of the cracked crown hidden in his hand. Thor stood on the bridge, breathing hard. No longer only a warrior, but a guardian who had learned that power without trust could ruin everything he loved. Sarah stood beside him, no longer a rebel running from the old order, but a woman who had chosen a better one. Above them, the first calm light broke through the clouds, and for one shining moment, the 9 realms seemed to remember what peace felt like. But far below the bridge, deep under Asgard, the storm engine kept turning one last time, as if something inside it had not fully settled. And somewhere in the darkness, Loki was already planning what to do with the broken crown piece he had saved for later. Because this war for Ragnarok was not over yet, and the next storm was already gathering in silence. The sky above Asgard looked quiet again, but the silence did not feel safe. The broken rainbow bridge still hung over the cloud sea, shining in weak colors where storm energy had cracked it open. Below that broken path, far under the golden halls, the storm engine kept turning in a deep stone chamber, and each slow movement sent a dull tremor through the ground. Thor stood near the edge of the bridge with his broad shoulders set hard, his blonde hair moving in the cold wind, his blue eyes fixed on the dark below. He wore dark silver armor with blue glowing lines, a red cape, and heavy gauntlets that still carried the heat of battle. Beside him stood Sarah, a brave woman with black hair and a long braid, sharp gray eyes, and worn Valkyrie armor with gold trim. Her winged helm was scratched, her leather boots were dusty, and her face said the same thing Thor felt in his chest. The danger was not gone, and if they did not find the source, the realms would fall back into chaos. Mara joined them next, an older woman with gray hair tied back, tired eyes, soot on her cheeks, and a plain fire-damaged robe under a leather guard vest. She looked small next to the warriors, but she knew the old machines of Asgard better than anyone alive, and she was the one who understood what the storm engine had become. She pointed down toward the hidden lower halls and said the machine was still listening for the last command. If the broken crown piece reached it, the whole system could wake again and open the gates between worlds without warning. That was the real danger now, not war in the open, but a hidden machine that could turn a moment of peace into a second disaster. Thor heard her clearly, and for the first time since the battle, he understood that this was no longer only about strength. It was about stopping a mind that knew exactly how to use fear. Deep inside the lower chambers, Loki moved through the dark with quiet steps and a smooth, sly smile. He was a cunning man with black hair falling over one eye, pale skin, narrow green eyes, and dark green and black armor with sharp gold details. At his side, the polished crown frame held the broken crown piece he had saved, and the red light of the crimson relic pulsed inside it like a trapped heartbeat. Loki did not want chaos for no reason, and that was what made him dangerous. He wanted the other gods to face a truth they had avoided for years. Asgard had survived by hiding how the storm engine was built, how it took power from broken oaths, and how the crown of Ragnarok was made to force the realms into obedience. Loki believed the gods had always lied to keep their rule clean and holy, while the machine under their feet drained storms, fear, and promises to keep their kingdom strong. In his mind, if he could use the broken crown and wake the engine one more time, then everyone would be forced to see the ugly truth behind the shining walls. He was not trying to be kind. He was trying to control the story before the truth destroyed the world in a worse way. As he crossed the narrow tunnels, phantom shapes flickered in the torchlight. The phantom warriors had returned, ghost-like armored guardians with pale glowing bodies, hollow faces, and light-made swords. They had once sworn to protect the sealed chamber, but broken vows had cursed them into endless duty. Now they rose from the walls and floors like pale smoke, not because they loved Loki, but because the crown's pulse reminded them of the old oath that still bound them. Loki lifted the broken crown piece higher, and the guardians bowed for one terrible instant. Then they turned and marched ahead of him toward the engine chamber, clearing the way like silent soldiers following a lie. Thor, Sarah, and Mara descended after them through a stairway carved into black stone. The air grew colder with every step and the walls began to hum with hidden power. Mara explained the machine as they moved, and her voice stayed calm even when her hands shook. Long ago, the storm engine had been built to guide lightning safely through the realms, but the crown of Ragnarok changed its purpose. It could focus raw storm power not to protect, but to command. The crown piece Loki carried was the missing part that let the machine choose a target. Without it, the engine would stay asleep. With it, the engine could send a storm through the Rainbow Bridge, across the Valhalla gates, and into every realm at once. Sarah listened with tight lips and a hard stare because she had seen what happened when power was used without mercy. She wanted to stop Loki, but she also wanted to understand him, and that made her the first to notice something strange. The tunnels were not only filled with enemies, they were also filled with old seals, broken chains, and places where the stone had been repaired in a hurry. Someone had hidden parts of the machine from the gods themselves. That meant Loki had not created this secret alone. He had found a lie already waiting for him. The twist hit them all at once. The storm engine was not a new threat at all. It was an ancient shame buried so the rulers of Asgard could keep their image pure. Mara admitted it with a heavy breath, saying the first builders had feared what the machine could do, so later kings simply covered up the truth instead of destroying it. That lie had lasted for generations, and now it was waking up in full force. The lower chamber opened ahead like a huge hollow heart of iron and crystal. Towering rings of metal circled a core of blue crystal, and glowing rune channels ran across the floor like frozen lightning. The storm engine stood there buried beneath the world, huge and ancient, waiting for a hand to tell it what kind of thunder to make. At the far side of the chamber, the Valhalla gates stood sealed in the distance, massive and golden with ancient carvings and a faint white glow, as if they were watching the fight in silence. Loki stepped onto the central platform, and the broken crown piece began to answer the engine at once. Red light poured through the gold frame, and the rune marks on the crimson relic flashed bright enough to paint the chamber in bloodless fire. The phantom warriors surrounded the heroes in a wide ring, their light-made swords raised, but they did not rush in. They waited because the old oath had one last rule left in it. Whoever held the true claim to the crown could command them. Loki smiled then because he knew he had made the perfect trap. If Thor attacked him openly, the warriors would force the heroes back. If Thor hesitated, the engine would wake fully and the Valhalla gates would begin to open by themselves. Thor looked at the machine, then at the ghost-like guardians, and then at Loki, and he saw the truth hidden beneath the show. Loki was not just threatening the realms. He was forcing Thor to decide what kind of god he wanted to be. Strong enough to rule or wise enough to listen. That choice mattered more than any punch he could throw. Sarah moved first. She ran across the glowing floor with quick, sure steps, her braids swinging behind her, and she hurled a heavy chain from her belt around one of the engine rings. The chain locked fast, pulling a row of runes out of alignment and breaking the rhythm of the machine. Mara shouted for Thor to strike the central crystal instead of the crown, because if the core lost its balance, the whole engine would stop long enough for them to reset the seals. Thor answered without words. He lowered his shoulders, gripped his hammer in both gauntleted hands, and rushed straight through a burst of storm light. The phantom warriors struck at him with pale blades, but he drove them back with spinning force, each impact sending white sparks into the dark. Their bodies wavered not from pain but from doubt because Thor moved with purpose rather than rage. He was not fighting to prove he was stronger. He was fighting to protect people who had never asked for this war. That difference mattered. Loki saw it, and for a brief moment his smile faded. He had expected fury, not restraint. He had expected Thor to break something. Instead, Thor kept his footing and protected Sarah as she climbed one of the engine braces. She pulled free a rune plate and the whole chamber shuddered. The storm engine began to slow. Loki then revealed the last part of his plan. He did not need the engine to destroy Asgard. He only needed it to open the Valhalla gates for a few seconds and expose the hidden halls beneath them, where old records proved the gods had used the engine to bind storms to their rule. He wanted the truth seen by everyone, even if the sight of it shook the realms apart. That was his motive, and it was terrible because it made sense. He was angry at a lie so large that he was willing to break the world to reveal it. Thor stepped toward him, and his voice came out low and steady. He said the truth did matter, but truth without care could still become a weapon. Loki answered with that narrow, green-eyed look as if he had waited years to hear those exact words. Then he admitted something else. He had saved the broken crown piece not only for power, but because he wanted proof that Thor would choose mercy over pride. Loki had never fully trusted the gods, and now he had set a test that only a true protector could pass. Mara gasped when she heard it because she realized the final wound in all this was not the machine. It was trust itself. The war had been feeding on every broken promise, and each side had used the other's fear to keep the conflict alive. Thor understood at last that beating Loki would not heal Asgard. Only exposing the lie and sealing the engine with honesty could do that, so he did something no one expected. He lowered his weapon. He told Sarah to hold the chain tight. He asked Mara to speak the old sealing words, not as a command from a king, but as a promise to the people. Then he turned to the Phantom Warriors and spoke to them as guardians, not enemies. He told them their oath was not meant to serve a crown, it was meant to protect the realms from another broken promise. The ghost-like warriors paused, their hollow faces lifted, their light dimmed and then steadied. For the first time in ages, they remembered the shape of their duty. In that quiet heartbeat, the chamber changed. The red glow in the crown frame flickered, the storm engine slowed even more. Loki stared, shocked and angry, because he saw that Thor had broken the only kind of power Loki still respected. He had refused to make the lie bigger, and that choice began to undo the trap. Yet the engine was not finished with them. The blue crystals deep in its core flashed once, hard and sharp, and the Valhalla gates in the distance began to tremble with a white light. Mara threw out the final sealing words, and Sarah pulled the chain with all her strength, but the crown piece still hummed in Loki's hands like a live spark. The chamber filled with rising thunder, and every rune on the floor lit together. Thor braced himself, his cape snapping behind him, as the machine pushed back against the seal with one last violent pulse. Loki looked from the gates to the heroes, and for the first time he seemed unsure of the ending he had started. He had wanted the truth revealed, but now he saw the cost of forcing it too fast. The Phantom Warriors formed a ring around the engine instead of around him, their swords lowering as their old oath woke fully. The next moment changed everything. One of the sealed stone panels beside the engine cracked open, revealing a hidden record chamber that none of them had seen before. Inside were rows of old tablets and a single symbol carved over the door, the mark of the first builders. It proved that someone from Asgard's ancient past had sealed this machine in secret, and that someone had meant for the truth to be found only when the realms were ready. Thor stared into that dark little room, knowing the fight was far from over, because this new discovery meant the lie reached deeper than any of them had guessed. The engine slowed, but it did not fully sleep. Loki tightened his grip on the broken crown piece, watching the hidden chamber like a man who had just found a second door. And as the thunder faded to a low rumble, the heroes realized they had not ended the storm. They had only uncovered the next part of its secret, and the path ahead now led deeper into the buried history of Asgard. The hidden chamber stood beneath Asgard like a buried heart that still remembered pain. Iron walls shone with old blue light, and deep cracks in the floor breathed out cold mist. Above them, thunder still rolled through the stone, but it was weaker now, like a giant beast forced to sleep with one eye open. Thor stood at the front with his blonde hair lit by the failing glow, his broad shoulders tense, and his blue eyes fixed on the machine below. Sarah stayed close beside him, her black braid hanging over worn Valkyrie armor, her gray eyes sharp and ready. Mara leaned on the wall for support, her gray hair tied back, soot still dark on her cheeks, while Loki watched everything with his black hair falling over one eye and a sly smile that no one trusted. In his hand, the broken crown piece gave off a low red pulse, and that light made everyone understand the same hard truth. The storm had not ended. It had only opened a new path, and that path led straight into the oldest wound in Asgard. The storm engine filled the chamber like a giant sleeping beast made of iron rings, blue crystal cores, and glowing rune channels. Its parts were old, but they were not dead because the crimson stone inside the crown still fed it power. The crown of Ragnarok was not fully formed, yet its black metal and gold frame curled around the crimson relic like a trap that had been waiting for the right hand. Mara stepped forward first, though her legs were tired because this mattered to her more than anyone else. She was the keeper of the old forge records, a woman who had spent her life repairing armor, studying broken runes, and warning others about forgotten machines. She looked at the relic, then at Thor, and spoke in a low voice that carried deep fear. Long ago, the builders of this place did not make the storm engine to protect Asgard alone. They made it to command the Rainbow Bridge, seal the Valhalla gates, and force all the realms to obey one will. That was why the engine had been hidden. That was why people had been told it was only a legend. If anyone used it the wrong way, the walls between the worlds could break open, and Asgard itself could become a cage. Loki's smile faded for the first time, and that change mattered more than any loud warning. He was a cunning man, and he always wanted control, but he also hated being lied to, especially when the lie involved him. He turned the broken crown piece in his fingers and studied the runes with a sharper focus than before. Then he made the next discovery, and his voice came out quiet but clear. The crown was not only a weapon, it was a key. The crimson relic did not just power the machine. It answered bloodline markings hidden in the old royal seal, which meant someone from the line of rulers had once used this place in secret. Thor stared at him, his serious face hardening because the meaning was obvious. This was not a random ruin. This was a built lie created by leaders who wanted the power of storms without letting anyone know the cost. Sarah felt the danger in that truth right away, because if rulers had hidden this chamber once, then someone might still be trying to finish what they started. Before anyone could speak again, the blue crystal cores in the engine gave a sudden bright flare, and the whole room shook with a heavy pulse. The hidden chamber was waking up. Then the phantom warriors came out of the darkness. They rose from broken oath marks carved into the stone, their pale glowing bodies moving in silence, their hollow faces turned toward the heroes like judges with no mercy left. Each warrior carried a light-made sword, thin and bright, and their armor looked real even though their bodies were made of curse light. Mara knew who they were at once, and she explained the danger while backing away from the first line of attack. These warriors were not evil by choice. They were guardians born from broken promises, bound here when the first rulers swore to protect the realm and then used the engine for secret power instead. Their pain had turned into duty, and their duty had turned into a trap. They would attack anyone who came too close until the truth was spoken and the oath was repaired. That made them dangerous, but it also meant they could be reached. Thor stepped forward first, raising one gauntleted arm as the first warrior struck, and the clash sent white sparks across the stone. Sarah moved fast beside him, her boots striking the floor in sharp beats as she slipped under a second blade and knocked the phantom back with the flat of her own weapon. Loki, meanwhile, stayed just out of reach, using the broken crown piece to read the rune flow, because he had already learned that this chamber answered to memory as much as force. The fight spread through the chamber in clear, hard waves. Thor took the center, strong and steady, driving the phantom line away from the engine whenever they pressed too close. Sarah protected Mara because the older woman was the only one who could explain the old runes fast enough to matter. Loki moved between both sides of the battle, not fighting like a hero, but thinking like one when it counted. He spotted narrow channels of light beneath the floor, and he noticed that each pulse from the storm engine followed the same pattern as the broken crown piece in his hand. That was the next twist, and it hit him hard. The crown was not built to control the relic alone. It was built to create a false king, someone who could wear the storm and speak with the engine's voice. In other words, the crown was a trick designed to make one ruler look chosen by the heavens, when in truth the machine was choosing the ruler for power, not honor. Loki looked up from the rune lines, and for one rare moment, there was no smugness in his face at all. He saw how easily ambition could be shaped by a lie, and he saw how close he had come to wanting that same lie for himself. Mara forced herself to the center of the chamber, even while the floor trembled, and she placed both hands on an old stone pillar carved with a royal oath. Her tired eyes lifted to Thor, and she told him the last part of the secret. The hidden chamber had once belonged to the first High Ruler of Asgard, a man who feared the realm would fall if the Rainbow Bridge was left open to every world. He had built the storm engine to protect the gates, but then he grew afraid of losing control. So he ordered the crown made, and he ordered the truth sealed away. The lie was simple and cruel. The people were told the engine was lost in a war. In truth, it had been buried under the city, and it was fed quietly for generations by people who never knew what they served. Thor listened without moving, but the weight in his face changed. He had always believed strength came from carrying more than others could bear. Now he saw that strength also meant facing what one's own history had hidden. The phantom warriors paused as Mara spoke the old oath aloud, and their glowing forms flickered with confusion. For the first time, the curse that held them seemed to weaken because the truth had reached them. But as the last word left her mouth, the crown of Ragnarok answered with a brutal flash, and the crimson relic blazed hot enough to fill the entire chamber with red light. A deep door in the far wall unlocked with a grinding roar, and cold wind rushed out from beyond it. Everyone turned at once, because whatever waited behind that door had been sealed for a reason, and now it was finally awake. The cold wind poured through the open door like a living thing, and it carried the smell of old stone, wet iron, and buried power. Thor stood at the front of the chamber, his blonde hair bright against the red glow, his broad shoulders squared, and his bright blue eyes fixed on the dark passage. Sarah stayed close beside him, her black braid resting over battered Valkyrie armor, her sharp gray eyes tense but steady. Mara, older and tired, kept one hand pressed to the wall as if she needed its support, and Loki watched in silence, his black hair falling over one eye while his narrow green eyes studied the door with sharp interest. The curse had weakened when the truth came out, and for one clear moment, all of them felt it. Then the crown of Ragnarok flashed again, the crimson relic burned hot inside its gold frame, and the entire room seemed to wake up in pain. Everyone knew the same hard truth at once. Whatever was behind that door had been sealed because it was too dangerous to leave free, and if it reached the Valhalla gates, both worlds could fall into ruin. Thor moved first because that was what he always did when others were afraid. He lifted his heavy gauntlets and stepped toward the door, not because he felt fearless, but because he knew people were counting on him. Sarah followed with her winged helm low and her body ready, because she wanted the same thing Thor wanted, which was to protect the living and honor the fallen. Mara came last, and her tired face held the weight of a long, hard life spent studying old fires, old runes, and old warnings. She had spent years guarding broken records about the storm engine, the ancient machine buried under the realms, and now those records finally made sense. The crimson relic was not just a glowing stone, it was a key. The crown of Ragnarok was not just a dark symbol. It was a control ring built to force the relic to wake the sealed force beneath the mountain and channel it toward the storm engine. That was the reason Loki had wanted the relic from the start, and it was also why he had hidden half the truth from everyone. He had not wanted the world to end. He had wanted to control who would decide what came next. The chamber shuddered as the first phantom warriors emerged from the dark passage. They were ghost-like armored guardians with pale glowing bodies, hollow faces, and swords made of light. They were not mindless monsters. They were the broken promise of an old oath, trapped in a curse that had turned duty into endless fear. They moved in a silent line, not rushing at once, but waiting for the room to force their hand. Thor raised his gauntlets and sent a crack of lightning across the stone floor, driving the first rank back. Sarah dashed in beside him, her steps light and fast, and she struck at the gaps in their formation with sharp, clean motions that opened a path instead of wasting strength. Mara did not fight like a soldier. She lifted her hands, spoke the old warning words she had learned from fire-scarred scrolls, and the runes on the wall answered with a low glow that slowed the cursed warriors for a precious moment. Loki watched the battle with a strange, unreadable face, and then he finally spoke. He said the sealed force was not a beast at all. It was the locked heart of the storm engine itself, and the crown had been made to wake it in the wrong way. If that heart opened without the proper seal, the energy would tear the gates apart and pull every broken oath in the region into one endless storm. That was the first real twist, and it hit harder than the red light around them. The danger behind the door was not just a hidden enemy waiting to attack. It was part of the same machine that had held the realms together for generations. Mara realized the deeper truth before anyone else did. The old builders had not buried the storm engine because they feared its power alone. They had buried it because someone had already tried to use it with the crown of Ragnarok, and the result had been a chain of cursed guardians, broken vows, and sealed doors that could only be opened by truth. That explained why the curse had started to weaken when the truth came out earlier. It had never been a simple spell. It had been a vow-bound lock meant to keep liars and greedy rulers from touching the machine. The more honest the heroes became, the less the curse could hold them. But the crown still fed on fear and hidden desire, and it responded to Loki's own secret wish to be the one who understood it best. He wanted to prove that he was more than a trickster. He wanted to become the only one smart enough to stop a disaster that everyone else had ignored. The hidden door opened wider with a long stone groan, and the chamber beyond revealed a vast circular hall full of blue crystal cores, rusted iron rings, and glowing rune channels that ran into the earth like veins. This was the storm engine, and it was far larger than Mara had ever dared imagine. At the center of it stood a broken frame that matched the shape of the crown of Ragnarok, and inside that frame, the lightning of the realms moved in slow, ugly pulses. The crimson relic drifted forward inside its gold frame as if pulled by a silent call. Thor reached out, but Loki stopped him with one hand and finally told the whole truth. He had not stolen the relic to rule anyone. He had taken it because he believed the crown of Ragnarok would fall into the hands of a ruler who wanted the power for conquest. He had hidden the relic and led the others in circles because he thought he could use their trust to reach this room before anyone else did. He had been wrong to lie, but he had not been wrong about the danger. In that moment, Sarah saw the shame in his face, and she also saw the fear underneath it. Loki was not asking to be forgiven. He was asking to be believed long enough to help fix what he had helped break. Then the Phantom Warriors returned in full force, and the chamber turned into a storm of flashing steel, white light, and shaking stone. The cursed guardians poured from every side, drawn to the crown and the relic like moths to a fire. Thor took the center, his blue lightning striking in wide bursts that shattered their formation and forced them back from the engine rings. Sarah ran along the edge of the machine, using the broken rails and low platforms to strike from angles the Guardians could not predict. Mara found the main rune channel and began to sing the old sealing pattern under her breath, not as a spell of control, but as a promise that the machine would not be abused again. Loki moved with quick, careful steps between all of them, placing his hands on the crown frame and reading the rune marks as they lit one by one. He saw the final piece at last. The crown was never meant to be worn. It was meant to be locked around the relic, then turned by three voices speaking the same truth. The machine had been built by people who feared power in the hands of one proud ruler. That was why the seal required honesty, unity, and shared purpose. Alone, the crown would ruin everything. Together, it could shut the storm down. The crown did not want to be shut down. It flared with a violent crackle, and the crown of Ragnarok lifted the crimson relic higher into the air. The room shook so hard that dust fell from the ceiling in sheets. Far away, through the broken upper passages, the Valhalla gates answered with a deep golden hum, and everyone understood the stakes at once. If the storm reached those gates, the path between worlds would open too wide, and all the honored dead would be trapped in a battlefield with no end. Thor looked at Sarah, and Sarah looked at Mara, and then all three turned to Loki. No one spoke for a long second, because trust had been broken too many times to heal in an instant. Then Loki bowed his head and said he would not run again. He would stay, even if the machine burned out his chance to ever be trusted again. That was the moment his own arc changed, because he stopped trying to win control and chose to become part of something larger than himself. Thor nodded once, and that small sign of trust was enough. He placed one gauntleted hand on the crown frame. Sarah placed her hand beside his. Mara stepped in last and pressed her palm to the rune channel, her soot-marked fingers shaking only a little. Loki added his hand too, and the crown responded with a sharp burst of light that ran across every iron ring in the storm engine. The three voices spoke together, not as a spell from power, but as a plain promise to protect what had been broken. Thor said the truth, Sarah said the truth, Mara said the truth, Loki said the truth. The crown cracked down the center, and the red light inside the relic changed from wild and angry to steady and warm. The Phantom Warriors stopped mid-step, their hollow faces turning upward as if they could finally hear the end of their curse. One by one, they lowered their light swords and faded into calm white sparks that drifted into the rune channels and sealed them shut. The chamber grew quiet except for the deep sound of the storm engine powering down, ring by ring, until only a soft blue glow remained. The final seal did not come with applause or thunder. It came with a simple, solid locking sound that echoed through the hall and then into the deep mountain beyond. The crown of Ragnarok lost its cruel edges and became an empty frame again. The crimson relic dimmed to a gentle red pulse, no longer a weapon but a guarded key. The Valhalla gates, far above the broken bridge, stopped shaking and slowly settled into stillness. Thor let out a slow breath, and for the first time in the entire journey, his serious face softened with relief. Sarah straightened her armor and gave a tired smile because she had wanted justice, but now she also had peace. Mara looked at the quiet machine with wet eyes because her long years of watching old warnings finally had meaning. Loki stood apart for a moment, then stepped back toward them instead of away. He did not ask to be called a hero, and no one offered that word too quickly. He had lied, but he had also stayed. He had helped seal the storm, and he had chosen truth when it mattered most. When they left the chamber, the cold wind behind them was weaker now, almost gentle. The broken rainbow bridge overhead still glowed in cracked bands of color, but the storm around it was finally losing its grip. Thor, Sarah, Loki, and Mara climbed back toward the light together, no longer tied by fear alone. They were tied by what they had faced honestly and by what they had chosen to protect. The realms would still have hard days ahead, and old wounds would not vanish overnight, but the curse that had driven them apart was gone. The last gate remained closed, the storm engine slept, and the dead were safe in their hall. Thor carried the burden of leadership with more care now, Sarah carried her courage with more trust, Mara carried her knowledge with hope, and Loki carried his shame without hiding from it. In the end, that was the real victory. They did not just stop a terrible force. They learned that truth, shared openly, was stronger than fear, and that lesson would guide them long after the red light had faded from the stone.